So far, so good. One part of the technology is working, it looks like. We're off to a great start. And by the way, if you're curious if we're recording or not, if I forgot to put it on, it's this little button right here. It looks like a Wi-Fi signal indicator. That's what's indicating it's streaming to YouTube. If you ever notice that it's not there, feel free at any point to say, don't forget to record the lecture, because I obviously did at that point. Well, welcome back, everyone. Looks like it's official. We can start. For today's class, we are going to return to example 2, but definitely the first thing we should do is talk a little bit more about what's going on with my stats lab, get a little bit more comfortable with the technology and those sort of things. I did want to share with you something I heard in my earlier class today. I have other classes, and I asked people in this class if their course materials button is working, and just about everyone said it's not working in any of their classes whatsoever. How's that thing working for everyone else? Is it working in other classes of yours, or is it just kind of hit or miss? Oh, gotcha. Yeah, they asked us by email 1 week before class starts to create something called course materials, link ISU book bundle. And for me, the only class it works in is this one. All the other classes, it's just broken, completely broken. And it's kind of suspect on this one as well, but I did make some mistakes on the first day of class. One mistake was I had a link down here for a direct link to Pearson My Stats Lab. Turns out that is not the way to actually use the platform. And when I hit that link, I also hit the course ID, which is needed for some folks if you opted out of the book bundle program. So sorry for that. And thank you to the student who emailed about it. It's now right here under the support page. So it looks like everybody, whether you opted in to the book bundle or opted out, you will go through here to register for My Stats Lab. You might have to use this course ID to get started, but all works through this link for everyone in the class. And another piece of information I've learned, which is really interesting, even if you've opted out, you register through this and the system treats you as if you are opted in. They don't ask for payment or anything like that. Apparently they have to go back and figure out who is opted in, who is opted out. And after 2 weeks, they'll get back with you if you opted out for payment. So it's all really convoluted. I should pause right here. Any questions at the moment? Okay, so I don't think this is ISU's proudest launch of any product at all, but we're getting through it. Clicking on it takes you to an external tool, which loads up something. It should look about like this. You launch courseware. And again, everyone in the class would have to go through this link. Even if you've done this already and you have a separate bookmark on your browser, I believe you still have to go through this approach to have everything, every piece of material available to you. So clicking on this is going to take you through a first set of steps on your first setup. And that's where it gets really vague and foggy for me, since they didn't show me what the student side of any of this looks like. But that's going to be the process. Let me get back to that spot. Click on the course resources. You can use the student registration support, but this was created by Pearson. And when you look at this document, I don't think this is very, very targeted for what it actually looks like as a student creating their account for the first time. But one thing you have to do is get access to your Pearson content. You might have to enter your student Moodle Pearson accounts. Let's see here. Your Pearson account is probably already created for you. Is that what folks have found, that when you click on that, everything is set up? Or did you have to create an account in there?
Mine was created from last year.
Okay, so other folks did have to create one then if you didn't have one already. Gotcha. If you already had an account, I would assume just using that same login credentials is the best way to go. Otherwise, you'll probably be at a step where you're creating a Pearson account, logging into that. Then at that point, you start to get to this page. Once it's all set up, you click on that again. And after more links, it should drop you directly to something that looks about like this over here. So that's the page that we're all trying to get to. There's some technical issues getting everyone on this spot. I'm in an email chat group with about 10 other instructors for statistical reasoning on this university. Some instructors are saying students have had issues where they get to this page and everything is just blank. There's nothing available. So anyone have that issue? A blanked out page, unresponsive? There's probably other issues. Anyone have any weird issue that you found at so far?
Well, when I first opened mine up, the My Lab Math section on the tool bar on the left was not there for me. So it just gave me like the option to click on the assignments, but I couldn't view any textbook at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it gave me the calendar, so I had to go back into Moodle and then reopen it. And when I reopened
Gotcha.
it, Moodle, that's when I was able to see the book.
So you'll get this full set, including the e-text context, that's the book, if and only if you go through that link right there.
After you register.
After registering, gotcha.
They'll open it up and you'll get to your normal page, and then if you go back to Moodle, it'll set you up with a second page, and that will help too.
Gotcha. So it's kind of tricky. Because of all this extra nonsense on day one, day two already, we're not gonna have a quiz like we usually would on a weekly basis. I usually put my quizzes right here, posted on either a Wednesday or Thursday, but like, this is a slow start this semester with all these weird technical issues. So we'll pause our quiz and do it on the next week is when we'll get started. So we're going a little bit slow at first since there's no reason to power through this material with, we're having issues with getting this going. So I did look at the statistics early this morning on who's registered. I believe we've got about 70% of the class all registered. So we are doing pretty good, but I know if there's a technical issue, it could be a really insurmountable issue until it's figured out. So if that's you, if you're struggling to get to this page, send me an email, see me after class, and I'll get with my other instructors to see if they figured something out. Really, a lot of this has to be figured out by Pearson, but we're also trying to help bridge the gap and get support from the instructor side to those people there. Well, once you get inside here, again, going through that link, doing all the setup, you hit another link and end up at this. It's supposed to say My Stats Lab, but I guess it's My Lab Math is what we'll officially call it. And then we're not doing anything too fancy from here. You're really only looking for two things, the e-text as well as assignments. We're not going to do any quizzes through this platform. There won't be any exams. I might put some exam review material if people like using that on this platform, but I'll also have traditional exam review materials that are posted on this week right here as we get closer and closer. So think of this platform as that's where you read the book, that's where you get access to the book, and it's where you do the homework. But everything else is outside of that program. Definitely don't want to rely on it too much this first semester. But once you're inside here, this is pretty much how I would probably study for this course if I was in my own class. First thing I would do is put down a step-by-step guide. I would say read the book, section, or chapter relative to the next class. And you'll always know what's coming up next by going to the current week and just seeing what's coming up next. So we're currently on the chapter 1, running through that material. And so if you have an abundance of time, this is the very most important first step for studying for this class. Now, I know this is not completely realistic for everyone. A lot of us have jobs, kids, all sorts of other obligations. So even if you can't read this book or that section or chapter before coming to class, just skimming it, even 5 minutes before class, actually really does help. if you see words like quantitative versus categorical, when you read through that, even if you don't get it the first time, your brain is now primed to see those words again and understand them better when you're in class. If seeing these kinds of words like down here, well, not that far down there. If you see these kinds of words from the very first time in this class today, it is a little harder to retain that and make the classes effective. But even if you skimmed through the book and saw those words and read through them a little bit, it helps out a tremendous amount on retaining the information as you work through the class. So that would be my advice. Try to read as much about the book or the section, chapter, and I should say here, before coming to class. That requires a pretty high work ethic, so you just have to be reasonable with what you can do. If you can get to that level, I think that's awesome. It probably means you have a little bit more free time than the average student. But I think a lot of people realistically will see some weeks are just skimming. Some weeks they might not be able to take a look at all. Other weeks they have more free time and they're starting to catch up and get ahead by doing that pre-reading. So find out what works best with your schedule, do as much of that as you can, and you'll be in great shape. Then the second thing is come to class. Now, if you can't make it to class physically, just send me an email. I can provide you with a Zoom link if there's an off day, because I understand this is a night class and there's all sorts of weird things that could happen in your schedule because of that. But come to class and participate, and you're in great shape for the next thing. I mean, obviously coming to class is helpful, but if you can't make it, then that's okay. There's going to be weeks where things are a little bit harder. You maybe have other projects to work on, other exams. You can always, if you miss a class, definitely get caught up by going to recorded lectures right here. And we already have, let's see, one video, that one right there, our introduction day. So come to class and participate. Again, we have to be realistic with what we can do on any given week. Everyone's schedule is different. And what I mean by participate is anything along the lines of giving answers, maybe asking questions, anything like that, making comments. But even beyond that, if you're the kind of person that doesn't like to maybe talk in class very often, I was a pretty shy student, so I almost never talked in class. Participation also just means you're active while in the class, while you're taking notes, you're thinking about things that we're doing. Anything you can do to make your hand move, your eyes move, involving as many senses as possible, that's participation to me. You don't necessarily have to be directly asking a question every single class. I would consider everyone here right now participating. Make sense so far? Awesome. So my next thing I would suggest on this step-by-step process is for part 3, then work on the homework. So this might feel kind of backwards to you, and it definitely is for me in a certain sense. When I was a math student, I usually would start here on number 3. I just go right to the homework, figure out what the problem set is, and start working until I hit a roadblock. And when I hit a roadblock, I'd have to go over here and see what I'm missing. But this is step-by-step process is about saving you time in the end of the day. Sometimes working what appears to be a little bit slower is actually saving you a massive amount of time at the end of the day. Because if you read the book ahead of the class makes a whole heck of a lot more sense. And then after seeing these topics 2 different ways, when you go into the homework system, it's probably going to seem like a whole bunch of familiar problems. I mean, that's how I've designed the class and the examples that we're doing. And so you find that you're probably spending a lot less time on homework, the more you can hit step 1 and step 2 in this process. So that's my recommendation for studying in this class. That's what I would do personally if I was in this class. I didn't start doing that until I was, I think, a junior or senior because, well, my classes got harder and I just had to evolve how I was studying. So if you find yourself in that kind of situation, take a look at how you're approaching this class. Sometimes reordering the way you do things is tremendous. Well, any questions, folks, about that? That's just a 3-step process. Okay, and I realize it's a lot of work to get every single thing here done right before class, like all the reading exam, for example, but every little bit that you can get done will always help. So, well, let's see here. Let's get back on track. So we discussed getting inside here. let me know if you have any problems or roadblocks on getting this to go. So the next thing we ought to talk about is really the textbook right here. We looked at it before, but let me make sure we have a good understanding of how to get there. It got a little bit foggy for me myself when I was showing it in class. So once you're here, click on e-text contents. Maybe the arrow is a great shortcut here. Could go directly to a chapter, or the way I've been doing it is just clicking here and then clicking this link. That takes me, says ebook 2, there it goes, Pearson. Takes me to a blank page. Maybe this is what they were talking about. Let me try again. Close tab. Oh, that was a bad idea. I closed the whole thing out. Well, if it breaks, I find sometimes before class even started, just closing out the browser and starting over helped me out. We didn't quite go that far, but let me try this once more. Launch the courseware. Okay, we launched it. You can tell that this is kind of like software gore when the tab keeps switching its title. They don't have it quite optimized right. Now back here, I clicked on e-text context and that right there, but I think it's probably just simpler to click on the chapter directly. Let me try that approach. Okay.
Chapter opener. Yeah, I gotta try it again.
Right there in the bottom. They don't make this easy, do they? So you want to go down here, chapter opener. Okay. Seem to be on that same. This time it seems like it's doing something, and now it appears to be working. It all just seems kind of janky at the moment. So if you're not having the book work out, if it's not loading up at all, also let me know about that. If we have to get that corrected one way or another. Okay, just click away all the pop-ups. Seems like pop-ups are coming back on the internet for some reason. Then from there, I'd go to the table of contents. Directly click on the chapter you're wanting to get into. Chapter 1 stat starts here. And it looks like we're pretty much here. If you scroll through, you're reading the actual textbook. And it's kind of strange. You can click on these things here, but I think the easiest way to read it is just using this toggle to change pages. And as you do that, it scrolls in kind of a weird way. I had to scroll up to get to the top of the page, scroll down to read through it. Let's keep on going and see how it all looks. This one took me to the top. That's right directly ahead of the book as well. Here's the who, what. I wanted to get one page where, yeah, I had to scroll way up. On page 5, there's something on data. Oh, I think I see what it's doing. It's just taking me down.
So it's based off each, so see on the left, it says who and what, and then how the data are collected.
Yeah.
If that's what the arrows are doing, is switching those.
Oh, I see. I was missing that little pop-up right there. So I'm in one subsection. This just scrolls down sometimes, essentially. So that's pretty much the textbook. It is, well, it's not too bad. I think I just have to get used to it personally. Sometimes this is what I wanted to get to. I got to pages that look like this. This looks broken, but it is actually right. I actually opened up the real textbook. That's all there is on this page. So really kind of strange organization. Right click again, and that's the next page.
If you hit the headphones down the bottom left, that it'll read you the chapters.
Oh, we were showing that at the start of class. Let's try this out actually.
Or you can highlight like where you want it to start.
Just read all that.
Well, it'll just continue to read. It'll change the pages for you too.
Oh, wow. Let's.
Or you can have it stop on the end of the pages.
Gotcha.
You just have to mess up the settings.
That's kind of. Let's not. That's kind of awesome in a way. I can see that being really effective if you're commuting between campuses, for example. That could be pretty awesome. Not just for this class, but other classes as well. So that's a cool feature. Thanks for mentioning that.
With all of their
Gotcha. That's a pretty huge chunk of classes here at ISU then.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the experience with the book so far. I think I mentioned before, I probably wouldn't do too much custom stuff like say flashcards or things like that because that's now tied into this platform. It might be more useful to have things that you create outside that platform, physical notes or different files on your computer. But any other questions or comments, folks, about using the book at the moment? Okay, so that's how the book looks. How do we get back to homework? Let's see. It opens a lot of links, so I probably just start closing tabs. If I want to get to homework assignments, you can see that under course home. But I feel like the course home is a little too busy. There's a whole set of things that are going on here. It's easier to find your assignments by just clicking on this one. It's a little bit more directed. There's not so much visual noise on this page right here. It's just clear that these are our assignments, and I don't know why they hide the score. Probably for privacy of some kind. These are my answers, and I have a 0%. Not too shy about admitting that. But that's where all your assignments are. Any questions, folks, at the moment? Okay, so if you click on one of these, it says statistics starts here, and we looked at this page before. I missed this question number 8. We might come back to this one here. I think this one was tougher, but I want to show one other feature about this. Let's just go to basic question 1. I mentioned there's unlimited tries on this, and I gave it a whirl, and I found it didn't seem like there's unlimited tries. There was something I was missing. So let me show you what I found out just by playing around with this thing. So I'm going to try to intentionally just get this wrong. I'm going to click something without much thought, check the answer. And these little fields are actually really quite helpful. They try to give decent directed hints and information on what might be missing, things like that. Let me just hit final check. See, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of tries on this. It says that's incorrect. Your correct answer was actually A, C, D, and I answered A. I had to select all that was correct on this one, so I missed it. Let's see, try again. And it takes me to this. Let's see. I want to redo this question though. So A, check answer. That's incorrect. Try again. And then let me try once more, final check. The system's probably really frustrated with me. And I'll just go X. And here you could hit try again. And it resets the whole question. So it's in that way you have unlimited attempts. There's a try again button on some of these problems. Let me see question number 8 again. This one was a little bit trickier. This one had multiple parts. We'll probably come back to this one. This one didn't have a try again then button, however. This one had a try similar question. So if you see a try similar question, same idea. You're just doing another attempt on that problem. It might change the information around, so numbers could potentially change. But it looks like for these questions, at least out of chapter 1, it's actually giving you the same question. So you're just trying out the same problem once again. And again, I think that's important because these are really hard questions to get right the very, very first time. So this is more about just becoming familiar with the problem. And don't feel like if you have to try again a few times, you're not learning this. You're figuring out why you got something wrong, why one answer might be incorrect and not another, and so on. Well, any questions, folks, about the homework so far, getting new attempts and such?
The blank question notes on Moodle, we'll never submit those to you, do we?
No, that's only if you need them blank, yeah. I just got in the habit of doing that only because some folks were telling me back in other classes, this was just last semester, that they wanted to print out, say, this right here, because they want to fill it out from scratch just to study for an exam, but they don't want that when they print it out. So if you ever came back to the notes to study for exam, you'd want to go to the blank lecture notes, since this all filled in is not as helpful for studying any longer. Other questions or comments so far?
All of our assignments are gonna be in my stats.
They're all going to be here except for the quizzes, but when I post the quizzes, there'll be just an assignment thing right down here. In fact, let me give you an idea of what it'll look like. I have a different class with quizzes. They're using WebAssign, which seems to be working better, so they had to do quiz 1 this week. We're going to be off the hook for our first quiz, but it's going to be pretty much the same sort of deal. I post my quizzes at the very bottom. They look like this with an assignment, some information for submission. When you click on it, it gives you the PDF to the actual problems. I don't want to open that because we're not in that class. That would be not very nice for the Zoom recording, but it's just going to give you a blank PDF. You can solve your quiz on a fresh sheet of paper like this, or print it out and copy in the information on the quiz itself. It's really up to you. But this will be completely extraneous to the My Stats Lab or My Math Lab. My Lab Math, I'm never going to get that name right. So other questions so far? Okay, so think of this as, this is just where you're practicing the statistical ideas. That's the reason for the unlimited attempts. I'm going to be pretty flexible on due dates as well, where even if you don't hit the due date, you can still come back in and do these assignments. The purpose of the due dates, once again, is really just general pacing. If you're getting behind on a couple sections, I'd say that's normal. I mean, you hit ports in your semester where you have big projects, big exams coming due. You might get behind on a couple of these. If you find you're consistently behind on about 5 or 6 exams, that'd be an indication that you're really pretty far behind on the course. You want to make sure that you're hitting as many as possible by the due date. But if something bad happens and you are 5 or 6 assignments behind, you can make that up, come back in the system and get those things done. So that's one feature of having this. It is pretty flexible with the due dates and such. And other thing you might be interested in is, how do you even see your grade? That one's not as bad, I think. It's student grade book. But one thing I want to make as clear as possible is that when it comes to the student grade book, this is just your score on the homework portion. This is not your grade in the class, just your homework grade as it relates to the My Lab Stats or whatever it's called. So just to be clear, if I open up the syllabus, this component right here called homework, this is the My Stats lab that you're doing through Pearson. And so when you see your grade here, mine is 0% because I haven't gotten anything right yet. But that's just relative to this one little chunk right here. The quizzes are worth almost as much. What I'll be doing is, at the end of each week, once we really get going, I'm going to take your grades from inside here, import them into the grade book inside statistical reasoning. It'll just be a new entry that says, My Lab of Math. It'll say what your grade is. I'm just going to be directly importing it at the end of the week. Not this week, since we're all getting started and such, but you'll see that as a habit on the next weeks. Well, any other questions so far, folks? Okay, oh, I did miss a chat. Courtney says, no, there won't be any points docked if you do assignment in late. So there's no worry about that. It's more just general pacing is the point of the due dates. So I think the way I have this all configured is, even if assignment goes past due, you can go right directly back into it and start working that assignment to improve your grade. But I'll be checking out these settings a lot this semester. This is probably going to be a big project of me, making sure everything is working. If you find out something is just not working as intended or looks funny, let me know right away and I'll start working on it. Other questions or comments so far, folks, about any of those ideas? Okay, so sorry for the weird ISU book bundle. I only learned about it when I got emails, I think in May, and then they started coming in again in August. It doesn't seem like it's been the best launch at all, but so far, most of the classes registered. If you haven't registered yet, give it a try by clicking through here and let me know what issues might be coming up.
Apparently it's free for 2 weeks, so regardless if you pay for it or not.
Yeah, so they don't even give you an option of selecting the free access. They just give you access.
Yeah, we don't know much. I think it was. I think it was like $55. I don't know. I think maybe that was another one. I don't know.
Let me take a look. I believe it's somewhere to register here after opting out. I think it's about $99.99, but I realize I don't have that paper on me. I'm gonna double check that to let you all know. So find cost if opted out. Okay, I'll be sure to get back to you on that on Thursday's class. Well, so far, beyond my stats lab, we are right here in chapter 1. We looked at the preliminary example, but we didn't really get too far on those notes. Really, that was an example that we'll be taking a look at as we get through the course, because really everything is right here that we want to analyze in a course like this one on statistics. But for the moment, let's go to the actual content that you're going to start seeing on the homework assignments. Here's where our class is starting formally on the so-called 5 W's and how, as well as a definition of data. I think this problem is actually really kind of tricky. You won't see this question very often in this class. You might see it as a quiz. We'll see what our first quiz looks like, where we end up. This is a problem on the homework assignment. But what this is more about is it's a way for us to take a look at a statistical problem. They all look about like this. It's just a whole bunch of information. We have to dissect it, figure out a lot of different components of this information. And that's the purpose of the 5 W's and how, to see what is going on, how to break apart a word problem like this one. So let's give it a try. First thing I would do for something like this is I'm going to ignore the definitions for the moment and just take a look at the problem, attempt to answer the question, and then start pulling in the definitions as we need them. So let's begin. This says, people who get lost in the desert, mountains, or woods often seem to wander in circles rather than walking in straight lines. So that's concerning. To see whether people naturally walk in circles in the absence of visual cues, researcher Andrea Extel tested 32 people on a football field. So that's our introduction of this problem so far. One of the habits I like to get into whenever I read a statistical problem is paragraph by paragraph, try to take information as we see it and write it down in symbols that we'll more often see. Those 32 people are actually pretty important to this problem. That's something we would call n equals 32. And this is the sample size. So we know that we dealt with a sample of size 32. The reason I put a symbol n here is this is going to be used in a lot of formulas. And the simple action of pulling this, writing down n equals 32, that's going to help us a tremendous amount when we start plugging this information into the various formulas we get through. Well, that's our first paragraph. Let's go to the next one. It says next, one at a time, they, the 32 people on the football field, stood at the center of one goal line. They were blindfolded. Then they tried to walk to the other goal line. And that's funny how they said it. They tried to walk to their goal line. The researcher, she, Andrea Extel, recorded each individual's sex, height, handedness, left hand, right hand, number of yards they are able to walk before going out of bounds, and whether each wandered off course to the left or to the right. So whether you are on the left or the right as you veered off. They now tell us no one made all the way to the far end of the field before crossing one of the sidelines. And this is real data here from Winter 2004 Stats Journal. Well, that's all I could find as far as the actual information goes for writing it down in that kind of format. But now we're going to break apart this problem even further and figure out the 5 W's and how. I don't like how it's called the 5 W's, but there's really 6 things here we have to indicate. This is kind of challenging, so let's take our time with it. We don't have the actual raw data for any of this stuff, but as we go through the 5 W's, we can describe what it would have looked like if you were the researcher in charge, if you are Andrea and the person actually collecting the data. First with the 5 W's, let's start here. The who, by our definition, is who was measured. Well, we can come down here. She recorded each individual's, well, that's not quite right. These are the actual measurements. Who was actually measured? What would you say for this portion here? Exactly, it's all about the people. It's not what they measured about the people. So for the who, let's just say the 32 people selected for the study. So we've got a who down. It wants 5 W's, so we'll just go down the line. I'll check these off so we know where we're at. Now we're dealing with the what was measured. That looks like this is this right here. When it says she recorded each individual's and then lists a bunch of different parameters, we're saying what was actually measured in this study. So this one could be tricky to write out. What, I don't want to write equals. Let me go with just a colon. Not that that's a important matter, just a stylistic choice. So for the what, if you're doing this inside Pearson, it feels different. You have a pull down tab where you just select the correct option. The way we're doing it is how it would look like on a quiz or exam. It is a little bit tougher. So think of Pearson as you're just practicing The quizzes you see are the actual problems as they would be if they were a real exam question. It's a little bit tougher, and I think the hardest thing about it is deciding how much detail do you put in. One thing to keep in mind is on an exam, I wouldn't want you writing down pages and pages of stuff. You're always allowed to be a little bit terse because it is a timed exam. This is how I'd probably get through it. I would just say here, sex was recorded. Next was height. Next was handedness. For that, I'll just say, yeah, handedness might be fine. Or if you prefer, you could put it in your own words. Let's go with this route. Left, right-handed. But you have some freedom to how you decide to write this out. If you just said handedness, that'd be fine with me. This one is a little bit of a beast to write down. And if this was a real exam question, I wouldn't necessarily want you to write down that whole sentence. All you'd be doing then is just rewriting the entire example too in that point. So what I would say here is just, let's paraphrase to number of yards. Would that make sense to folks? So let's just call it number of yards.
Would you prefer on the quizzes and the exams to be in a list like that, or do you care if it's like sex, comma, height, comma?
I think it's all up to you. I would think of those as more stylistic choices, and I'm completely okay as long as I can read the information in an ordinary way. So formatting is usually less of a worry for me. But the bigger worry I found with giving advice for quizzes and exams is it's easy to want to write down a lot of stuff, but if your hand feels like it's dying from being really, really tired at the end of a 70-minute exam, you might have written a little too much. It's okay to be a little bit more terse when writing these out. But the format is less important as long as all the information's there. So let's go number of yards. I think I just like lists, so I'm just going vertically like this way. Let's see. I'll leave this one up to the class. We don't want to say that whole entire segment right here. How would you paraphrase that portion?
On or off course?
Well, we couldn't say on or off course necessarily because there's something that has to be recorded specifically. She wanted to record what side of the course that they ended off on. Just left, right? I think that would do it. We said here left, right-handed, so that's something different from left, right. And if you left it like that, that's enough for me to think, yes, you knew that the next one was whether they wandered left or right off the course. But if you wanted to be specific, you could just say left or right off course. So that's the what in the problem. The what was measured. Oh, sorry for missing the chat. Yeah, wandering left or right. Other questions so far, folks, with that one? Okay, so the who of this is the 32 people who were lined up on a football field. This is what was measured. And then from these measurements, that's where we get the data. The data is any collection of numbers, categorizations, or anything that is tied with the people that we are interested in this study. So let's do something a little bit different just for a moment. I'm going to pull up Excel, but I want to convey something to the class. You never have to use Microsoft Excel in this class. I'm using Excel only to demonstrate ideas and topics. And so occasionally, not very often, we'll pull this up. I'll paste what we do here onto the Word document itself, so you don't have to worry about pulling up Excel on your own unless you'd like to and you've got it loaded. But imagine you are Andrea. You're doing this study, and you have to take and pull in the data so that it can be crunched through your statistical software. What would this even look like is the big question now. What you would probably do is start off with something called subject. This is an identifier to say which person to study. It might have the person's name. It might just be a code. For example, if we're dealing with students and we're trying to protect information, under subject, you just see a bunch of student numbers so that we don't have to give away too much information. But every number uniquely identifies a particular individual. For this, let's just number them 1 to 32. So I think I go here. Yeah, there they are. So there's our 32 participants in the study. Some of them are way down here, but that's how you probably start. The moment you know you have 32 people sign up for the study, you put that down and then you think next, In my study, what am I measuring? That's this portion. And you start putting in headers like this. Sex, height. I'll put here left, right, handed. Little trick here, if you double click, it just formats the size. Then I would probably paraphrase this to just yards. We know it's the number of. And this one I'll say left, right, off course. And this is what the table would probably look like before the study is actually executed. So then probably spend about a day doing all of this. You start recording information. So say maybe subject 1 is a female. Let's say that this person is 5'10". Left-handed, right-handed, let's say left. Yards, oh geez, how about, I don't know what's reasonable here. Any volunteers for the number of yards? Let's go with 20 yards.
They're supposed to walk 100, they didn't make it very far. So
Good call. 20 seems reasonable, actually. And let's just say right. So that's what your data is going to start to look like. Another random row might be M for male, height, let's go 5'8". Right-handed, say 20 yards again. Maybe this person went off left, and that's what the data is going to start looking like. All these cells would have to be propagated before the study is done. But that's what we mean when we say data. We now have a collection of, some of these are going to be numbers. Some of them are really just types of classifications. We could convert this to a number, say number of inches altogether, number of feet. Instead of 5 inches, 10 feet, we could say 5 point whatever amount of feet and so on. So some of our data is a little bit different. We have data where it's categorizations, data which looks like it could be numerical, but this is what we mean by finding the who and coming up with the data. So let's put this in the problem just to give an idea for what data looks like. And again, this is only just meant to be an illustration, an example of the definitions we're going through right here. So let's put just really maybe briefly, not sure where I want to put it actually, maybe at the very end of the problem. Let's call this for an example of what on Drea's data might have looked like. That's a weird sentence. Let's just say an example of what her data might look like. It might start looking like this. And now she's had to measure the third person, get that person blindfolded and run it through. So that's the what. The what is us collecting the data. But there's quite a lot to data because we have to talk about variables as well. So we'll be coming back to these kind of ideas. Probably this problem as well if we want to take another look at it. But where we're at, we're on the how. Any questions or comments so far?
would the how, would what we just did on Excel be counted as charting? Would that be the answer to how she charted it?
That's a great question. So the how is a tough one to answer on this problem because, yeah, some of these are just direct interview questions, right? We ask the sex, we ask if you're left or right-handed. We might measure this, but we might just ask people, what's your height? And they tell us. And then that's part of the how right there, asks direct questions. The other part of the how is running the actual experiment that they're indicating right here. So the how can sometimes be a pretty complicated answer. On this kind of question here, if this was a real exam question, I think I would personally exclude the how. I would say list the 5 W's, but not the how. Regardless, this is a tough one to do the how on. Let's do it and see what it would look like. The how is how the data was actually collected. And I think the best answer we can give for what we know is on how, interview questions, then blindfolded and asked to walk to the other end. So that's essentially what they did when they blindfolded and asked the person to walk to the other end. They were getting these last bits of data, the yards and whether they went off course left or right. So how can sometimes be really, really convoluted? That's why it's a tough question. If you ever read a real statistical study out of a published journal that's peer reviewed, this portion right here is sometimes called the methods. And it's pages and pages of what they did in a very exact fashion on collecting that data. For example, there's a lot of stuff not exactly specified here. We would have to say, well, they said she recorded. Oh, here we go. They stood at the center of the goal line, blindfolded. Well, you have to be a little bit more careful about that. When they say stood at the center of the goal line, the paper might actually have a diagram inside of it. When it says blindfolded, they need to tell you how they were blindfolded, what material, what thickness, what product, so that if people try to replicate this study, the conditions have to be exactly the same. So the how in a real statistical study, this could be most of the actual pages of the study itself, how the data was obtained, because they need to tell you how to replicate it if you are replicating the study. But for this kind of problem, we can put basic information just from what we see right here. As a problem in the Pearson MyLab stats, it's just a pull down. You have to select among the correct answers. So that's a different kind of trickiness on its own. Well, let's see how far we're at. One thing I try to avoid in classes like these is scrolling up and down a lot. So you might see me taking screenshots here and there, just so that we could avoid that. So let's take this, plug it down here, and now we've got our how done. Well, there we go. We need the where. Any volunteers for what the where should be for this data? That's about all we have, right? We don't know which football field. We don't know if it was a professional, college, high school. We just know it's a football field, so it must have football field standards. Well, that leaves a lot to be decided there. We'll just say on a football field. But that's already pretty tough on its own. We don't have every bit of context to answer all these completely. So sometimes on these, you might find out there's an option that says not specified in the homework. Sometimes that is the best answer you can give, that the write-up of the problem just didn't even specify where.
Would it help if we put 100-yard football field?
Good point. This is, it said here, I'm missing where it was.
Just says there's people on football field, but we know that football fields, normal football fields are 100 yards.
Yeah, so we're assuming that that's what they're referring to. So let's say on a football field with 100 yards. We don't know for certain, but it's kind of implied, right? But there's a lot we're taking on faith here. So that's another trouble with these kind of problems in statistics. This is not even an abstract of a study. This is a paraphrase of an abstract. Very, very minimal information. Let me say that again, very minimal information. And we're just outsiders looking in. So we're trying to fill in the information to the best of our ability. It feels like you can't get the details exactly right. That's kind of a normal feeling.
Did you see that sentence again that you said it's a paraphrase of a what?
This is like the paraphrase of an abstract of a statistical journal. So it's intentionally not giving you the full information. The trouble with this is if we went to that source and found the article, this is going to be pages and pages we would have to read before we even got started on doing the statistics. So a lot of these are really, really paraphrased tremendously. So information falls out when that happens. But nonetheless, let's keep on going with what we've got. We decided on the where. How about the when? Any volunteers for what that would be? That's all they told us, right? So again, that's kind of a frustrating in a way. That's the best answer because that's just the best information we have. But this really just says when it was published. It could have happened in winter, but it could have happened anytime before winter 2004. It just takes time to get your results published sometimes. So best thing we can say is winter 2004. If you left it like that, that's good enough for me. I realize that there's missing information. If you want to be more specific, you might have said, or earlier. But I want to pull that off because I want to convey that we're not being hyper picky on your answers. The major thing I'm looking for is if you said winter 2004, and I look at the definition, when the study was performed, that fits. And so if you left it like this, I would say that that absolutely qualifies for a great answer on a quiz and on an exam. So you're trying to hit the spirit of what the definitions are asking, working with the information you have, which is highly, highly minimal. And on the actual homework problem, you'll see it's even more minimal than this. We just try to put in the best we can. So who is the 32 people selected? We measured all those pieces of information. The study seemed to be really about this. But we want to know if anything else influences it. So they collected extra variables. Sometimes in statistics, it seems like there's only one or two variables you care about, but the study is measuring sometimes dozens of variables altogether, just in case something has an influence or a correlation people might not have expected. But let's see, how many W's do we have? We have 4 of them and a how. One last one. Why? That's a kind of a tough one to think about, right?
She was testing the, whether they can walk in a straight line, or whether people walk in a straight line.
Exactly. The study is all about, it gave this idea that people lost wander in circles, and it says, we want to see if they naturally walk in circles in absence of visual cues. So that's what this study is all about. It's about human behavior. What would people do in this sort of situation? So that's the why, to determine if people walk in circles. Now that's pretty terse, and it doesn't completely capture everything, but if you left it right there, you are fitting in with the context of the problem, and I'd say it's enough of a response. I think a lot of people would probably want to put in, if it was a quiz, to determine if people walk in circles in the absence of visual cues. But just to reiterate, if you left off that portion right there and just said, in a more terse way, to determine if people walk in circles, I would say you're implying this part of the context because it's already written into the study. So again, you don't have to be completely specific on every one of these responses. Let's leave this more specific one on here, and we'll leave that one more terse. But this is about how a quiz problem would look like. Let's see, how far did we get? The 5 W's, and we've got them. Those are the 5 W's. We just finished off the why. Well, any questions at all, folks, on running through that? I honestly think it's a tough problem, and this is one of the reasons there's unlimited attempts in the homework system, because it's not easy to get this right the very first time. I think it takes a lot of careful looking at this, but I think the natural way to do this problem in the homework system is give it your first attempt. If you miss the question, take a look at what you might have gone wrong, and then just try it again. That's going to be kind of a natural experience on some of these problems. Let me delete that. It always looks weird when I'm deleting stuff, but it's usually just a screenshot that we're deleting on these things. We have a second portion of the problem, so here's the part B. And it seems weird to do a part B when we just dissect the data this much. But again, this is the spirit of what we're doing in this problem. The 5 W's and how is just a way to break down a problem and think about all the moving parts going on in it. And the reason I put a part B is, in the end of the day, when you're doing statistics, what you care about the most is the sample and population. I want to double check my color coding is consistent. Okay. So this is a more typical question. The 5 W's, I'm not going to ask a whole lot. That's just us getting started. Let's return to this question we looked at before. Population versus sample. The sample is easy on this one because the moment we went up, oh, I think my computer froze. The moment we went and said 32, we were talking about the sample size. The who is also talking about the sample. Let's put a little note here.
Will the who always refer to the sample?
Let me think here. Let me double check who was measured. Yes, that should always be referring to the sample. Yeah. So the moment they said 32 people, we said n equals 32 for the sample size. They essentially said what the sample was, also in the who. So you can think in those terms. Let's go and just copy that information. For our sample, it was the 32 people selected. Now, when you're identifying a sample in a population, something kind of strange happens. Usually it's one or the other that's easiest to specify. It's not always the sample, it's not always a population, depends on the problem. But if you've got one down, you can reverse engineer and say what the other should have been. So let's go now to population. So the population is the entire collection of all people we are interested in for this kind of study. The sample came from the population, so it was okay to be a little bit terse here, not very specific. But over here, we need to be a little bit more specific. We can't say all people because now we're including, say, people who are like toddlers, for example. We wouldn't want children to be in the study. We can't say all people include people with conditions like, say, Parkinson's or something like that. That might not be a fair representation of this kind of problem. So what should we put here for population? Any volunteers for what ought to go there? Not necessarily, because we're wondering anybody who could potentially be in that situation, whether they were lost or not, would they walk in a circle or not? Whether something like that, we could just say age range, we can say healthy people, anything along those lines, and we're on the right track. So let's say for population, all healthy adults. Again, it's not very specific. If we were really looking at this study, the information here for population probably has a couple paragraphs, but this is pretty good already. I'd say that this is a decent population.
Would you say the population, all people, something having to like relate it to being able to walk in a straight line? Because if we're talking about people being custody and we're talking about people in the desert, would that be a correct answer for the population?
You said all people who, what was it again?
Being like capable of walking in a straight line? Anyone capable of walking in a straight line?
Yeah, so we could say, I do like that answer. I see what you're saying. We could say all people who can walk in a straight line with visual cues, and then say what happens when we take away the visual cues.
Yeah.
So now we're getting a little bit more specific on who this study is really about. So let's say all healthy adults who can walk in a straight line with visual cues. So now these are going to be people who think they can walk in a straight line potentially without visual cues. And I think this is the real right targeted population. Again, in the actual study, it's probably a lot more specific than even this. There's probably age ranges and so on. They're probably excluding, say, pediatrics, geriatrics in this population. But do the best you can. Try to convey the spirit of this problem, what you know about what the people are going to be running through, and it gives you a good idea of what the population should really be. So I'd say part B is the most important part of this problem. Knowing the population, the sample is all about what we're doing in statistics. I like this part A, even though it's honestly kind of tedious to get through all of that information. We'll only do it once in chapter 1. Its whole purpose is getting used to breaking down that information, getting used to these kinds of problems. Well, any questions at the moment, folks, with that example 2? Okay, well, as we get further and further, we noted that some of these variables are not really the same. Some of them are categorizing, some of them are more about giving us actual numerical data. And so now we have to talk about what kind of variables that could come up. And that takes us to this portion of the document. Let's put this on a fresh page. Take this down so we can just refer to it as we look at the definitions. So our first initial definition, it says a variable is any characteristic whose value may change from one individual to another. And as we mentioned before, the data results from making observations or measurements on a single variable. That would be, say, this one variable or multiple variables at once. But when we say things like variable, it is kind of tricky. For example, in this problem we were looking at, use a different color. These are the variables. But not this column right here. This column right here is usually just a code column to tell between one participant in the study and another. This is considered an identifier. Not every data set is going to start out with an identifier. Oh, and Courtney asked, could you use the population type as college students? Oh, sorry, I missed that question earlier. I'd say college students would probably work for this. And to be honest, I bet you there's a strong chance Andrea was using college students on this one. So it depends on, I'd say that'd be a good answer on this one, but it would limit our population to some small degree, but not too much to be cause-worthy. I think that would be a good answer as well. Sorry for missing those chats. I'm going to get better at that as time goes on. There's a little red button at the very top of my screen that I have to notice, but for some reason, I think I have like pinpoint vision. I zero in on some other stuff. So when it says a variable, it's the information you're recording, but it's not the information on the subject itself. Even if they had names here, like say maybe Mike, Andrea, something like that, it still wouldn't have been a variable in this column. Well, with that in mind, any questions, folks, about the difference between the identifier and the variables of the study? Okay, I think the best way to think about it is the variables are the things you're recording, but if you're talking about actually labeling a person with a number, a code, or their name, or social security, or what have you, that's the one thing that's not a variable. That's the identifier. Some books call this an identifier variable. I don't know if that's the best terminology because it's still not a variable if they call it that. I personally just call it an identifier to just sidestep that confusion. So let's give this a try. Here's a new description of data, but this time, that's all we got. We need to find out as much as we can for these questions just based off that information and the table provided. So here's how it goes. It says mercury is a metal highly toxic to the nervous system, and below is a small part of a data set from a study that assessed the water quality of 53 representative lakes in Florida. That right there gave us a sample size. We have a sample of n equals 53 lakes. And now from that information, we want to know what is the population. This one's a little bit trickier. Any volunteers for what it could be in this problem? Good call, absolutely. If you're talking about 53 representative lakes in Florida, that means we're interested in every lake in Florida, absolutely. So for population of interest, it's all lakes in Florida. And I like that you said all as well. That's something I tell people, if you left it off, I would take off credit, but it really is an important emphasis. It reminds you, you're talking about the totality of any lake. If you're a Florida tourist, we're trying to tell you what the experience is probably going to look like as far as this information is concerned. So I'd say part A was the hard one on this one. When it says describe the sample, all you now have to say is the 53 lakes selected. So that's the population and the sample for this particular problem. Does that make sense to folks on identifying those two? Okay, let's see what else we're getting in here. This one is meant to be kind of a quick question that's asking, how many variables is there really? Anyone see how many we're dealing with in this study? Exactly, 5 variables, and good call. If you said 5 variables, you're realizing that that right there is not a variable at all. That's the identifier telling between one of the 53 lakes apart from the others. This time it happens to have the names of the lakes. I didn't know, but it makes sense. This is Florida. There's got to be an alligator lake in Florida. But those are the names of the various lakes. So there are 5 variables. And I'll often use this pencil right here if there's just some related comment. The ink pen right here is my way of saying this is the response I'm expecting if this was a real quiz or a real exam problem. Anything you see in this color, usually a pencil tool, that's just a related comment. You don't have to convey that when you solve it. But what I wanted to say here is lake name is an identifier, not a variable. So to me, that's kind of what's tricky about this sort of issue. Watch out for these kinds of things whenever you see your data. Not every data starts with an identifier. That's what's confusing. The problem could have looked like this. So it depends on what data is provided, how it's presented, but you can often tell that this is not a real variable if all it's doing is giving names. What we want to do is actually measure things about the lakes. It's pH, the chlorophyll, the average mercury, that seems to be more about the study, number of fish sampled, and the age of the data. These are all actual data itself going right here. But just like on the last study, these data are not equivalent. Some of them are numeric with units, meaning you could take averages. Other of them are categorical, meaning we're saying year old or recent, we're categorizing the lakes. Oh, sorry, question here?
Will the identifier always be first?
I would say that's not a guarantee, but it's highly, highly common. And if I'm writing that down a question, it would be awful for me to move that around. I would always format my identifier to come first in the data set. Other questions about that? Okay, well, the ideas that we didn't quite get into today, we have to get a little bit into figuring out what's going on with the My Lab stats. So we are taking extra time for that. We'll leave this for when we come back on Thursday's class. Here, we're going to now categorize what kind of, that's a bad word. We're now going to discuss what type of variables we have. We'll call them either categorical or quantitative. So this will be information we return to when we come back next class. Usually I try to end right at the minute, 6:40. But if I notice we're about to get into a new topic that takes, about 5 minutes just to get into, this is usually a good natural stopping point for us today. Plus it's week 1, so I think we deserve a 5-minute break. Any questions at all, folks, with what we've done so far? Okay, well, I'll see you all on Thursday. We'll finish off these notes and potentially get into section 2.1. We'll see how it goes. Have a great night, folks. I have about 25 minutes before my next class starts. So if you have questions, I'll be happy to help out.
Is that next question 2.1?
Oh, sorry. The next question is still chapter 1.
That's
Yeah, the 2.1 notes are the new document down here.
okay.
How's that system treating it so far? Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that from a lot of people, so that's good to hear.
Thank you.
Yep, you betcha.
Yeah, so.
Sure.
All done.
Okay, so if there's a back, they can go first, mine's long.
Gotcha. Oh, sure.
I think you're just gonna do the chapter.
Let me take a look at that. It's a H1S. I'd have to take a look. Yeah, do you mind if I take a picture of
I
that
want
to
to,
just?
I don't have to, I'm here. I want to do study first, I'm fine. Okay, so whenever, so I'm here.
Okay, and let me make a quick note. What was your name? Connor. Connor. Okay, I'll get back to you through email and I'll let you know if I find out about that one. You bet.
Yeah. Is there a study? Well, you can form one. I don't mind. I think it goes is like when you can join, I think you could form. I have a lab.
So
from
when it
one
comes
to
to like
like
absences
3:40
and things like that,
something,
are they marked
Every Wednesday.
like against your grade? Like,
They are
a
not.
certain amount in a
No,
semester?
we
It's
don't have
just-
anything like
You
that.
just have to make sure you watch the
Yeah,
lecture video, get caught up.
Mondays and then.
that's exactly right. Yeah. So I don't have
Well,
a
Monday-
policy.
Okay,
I'll
Monday-
do like
Monday
a
is
policy that night classes will be rough anyway, so.
yeah.
Thursday.
Yeah, I'm just curious, because I mean, I have the opportunity to always like go back and watch the lecture videos.
Mhm.
And, like, figure that out. And then you did say you're here before and after class, like for questions.
Yeah,
You're seeing
absolutely.
from like the following day.
I try to get here about a half hour early, 25 minutes early, and then I have that 20 minutes before my next class.
Okay.
Oh,
So you'll have those opportunities.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Yeah, good night.
okay, so we could do
So
Wednesday and Thursday?
Tuesday and Thursday, I'll be here like until Friday night, like 9:30.
So we could do it Wednesday and Thursday, an hour before class.
Yeah, I'm here for that.
Okay, awesome. What's that question?
So 4:30 Wednesday and Thursday, no reason, yeah.
Wednesday and Thursday. Yeah. That's. Okay, and mine's kind of more of answering, because I can't. Wait, so. I already answered it, but it said no, and I went to try to get back into answer it, and it wouldn't let me.
Well, you'd have to, click here.
Right,
and you
right.
should be able to. Is
So
it
like that,
But there's gonna be more than one that applies as correct on this.
right,
one.
right, right.
But yeah, pretty much like that is what allows you to attempt it again.
Okay, so, and then it's the question, so. It's a different question. That's not the question I had in the beginning. There's a longer question.
Oh, they gave you actual different ones. That's kind
Yeah.
of cool, like the way. When I was doing it, it kept giving me the same question back.
So if I get it wrong and I come back and it's a different question,
Mhm.
and then I answer and that's wrong again, like, it's just unlimited?
It is unlimited attempt.
But it always says this,
Well, once you get it correct, it'll mark it as correct
then it'll
there,
mark it as.
and then you move on to the next
Okay,
problem. Yeah.
okay.
So this one says like an
I
X
had
slash check.
half of it,
Yeah.
right?
It'll be just a check when the whole problem is right.
And then it goes like this. No, I don't. And then you answer it and then, okay, I think I got it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you betcha. Let me know if anything weird happens on there since we're all kind of figuring it out.
I know, it's new. so
Yeah.
I was like,
Mhm. Yeah,
Who is your contact? Are you with that one now? She did the looks at it. Okay.
you would then get calculated for the exam.
All right.
But I put one in that situation.
Okay, cool. Understand.
So.
Well, that's what I guess. Good. All right, love you. Bye.
Not sure if I did that right, but let's hope for the best.
Score.
Wow.
They're at home. You.
There's two files here. In Stockholm, yeah. You want, it's ready for. It's a-
I'm going to, I'm gonna skip your. Yeah. And I go home.
Awesome. It's a kind of screening program that just runs right out of the ladder. So. It's a program.
I'm actually trying to find this specific one.
Yeah, I think I got.
Oh, they changed the font. I know they changed. I'm sure they, but sometimes, it's just so hard finding, I don't know, that things.
Yeah.
Add written ones.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff there.
So what, when will we get you?
Yep, you betcha.
Wednesday, Thursday, Do we want to? Oh, I didn't, you were busy, that was fine.
Oh, no worries, Courtney. I'm glad that you were able to get those chats in.